Welcome to our webinar entitled College 101. And we are very happy to have you with us this morning. My name is Mary Beth Harrison Cunningham, and I'm the manager here at the Parent Resource Center. Our presenter today is Beth Felson. She is a success coach and autism specialist with over 20 years of work in the autism community. Beth has a Master of Science in Psychology from the University of Maryland. She has a graduate certificate in Autism Spectrum Disorder from George Mason University, is an Asperger coach training, Asperger Autism Network, is also a family navigator through the Virginia Commonwealth University Center for Family Involvement. And she is a peer mentor with the Autism Society of Northern Virginia. And we are very happy to have Beth with us this morning. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I appreciate it. And I'm very happy to be here this morning. Are you ready for me to start?
Yes, please.
All right.
We're happy to have you.
Okay. All right, let's get to it then. So just a little bit of housekeeping on my end. I know that Mary Beth is monitoring the Q&A, and I'm going to pause a few times during the presentation to answer questions, and then we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So if you think of a question, just type it in the chat, and as they are appropriate, I will get to them. All right, here we go. So welcome to College 101. Mary Beth already told you a little bit about me. I will just add that the transition to college is sort of my real passion area. And in order to keep my pulse on what's going on in that neck of the woods, I belong to several organizations that represent the disability specialists at college and universities, and there's always there are listservs, and there's always a lot of conversation about how those staff people at colleges and universities can better support students. So just know that I'm sort of monitoring what's been going on with those groups. Okay, so just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. This is not meant to really get into the nitty-gritty of everything that you need to consider when having conversations about college. It's meant to really be a good jumping off point for like almost a food for thought kind of session. So today we'll talk first about the differences between high school and college. We'll talk about what college readiness is and how to evaluate those skills. We'll talk a little bit about different types of college or post-secondary options. And then at the end, I have some suggested books and websites and things that you might want to check out. So the first thing that really makes sense to do is talk about the differences between the high school environment and the college environment. So one of the biggest differences is the level of structure in the day. You know, when you talk about high school, you get to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, of course, pre-COVID, or you log on at the beginning of the day. And you, as a student and as the parent of a student, you pretty much have a good idea of what's happening at various points throughout the day. It's very structured. College, on the other hand, is fairly unstructured. You may only spend a few hours each day in class, and then the rest of that time is really of the students choosing how they spend their day. The level of independent learning tends to differ between high school and college, with college having a higher level of independent learning. In college, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you meet your course requirements, and that is very different than high school, where things are pretty well mapped out for you. So student input and what they want to take in college is much greater. The level of involvement is drastically different, and this is in part due to the laws that govern K through 12 education and post-secondary education. So the best way for me to talk about that is to go to the next slide, which gives you a little bit of quote from each of the different laws. So K through 12 education is governed by the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the key term with the IDEA, and many of you I'm sure are familiar with this term, is FAPE, or Free and Appropriate Education. And FAPE is defined as specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of children with disabilities. States are required by law to ensure that every student has full access to educational opportunities provided in K through 12. Contrast that with the law associated with higher education, and that is the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires that reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures be provided for eligible students with disabilities. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means a couple of things that are important when considering what your student will do after high school. It means that students need to qualify for the programs on their own academic merit. So there are no specific modifications or exceptions or changes in the procedures for applying to post-secondary programs. So because of that, if your student receives testing accommodations as part of their IEP, you're really going to want to pursue and register for accommodations for the SATs and ACTs. Now, there is some question about whether or not it's even worthwhile at this point to take the SATs and ACTs. So that's a separate conversation. But if you decide that your student is going to take the college entrance exams, it's really important to apply. I think College Board usually says 7 to 8 weeks to get a response from them on whether or not your child can receive testing accommodations. So that's really important. And the other piece of the Americans with Disabilities Act that really comes into play with college is the term reasonable accommodations. Okay, so once your child is accepted into a post-secondary education program, then you begin the process of negotiating with the college, university, vocational program to determine what accommodations your student can receive in that setting. And that varies from college to college. There are some generally accepted standards, which are things like extended time on tests. So extended time on tests is a very common accommodation at the post-secondary level. However, what extended time means may differ from school to school. So when you are looking at colleges and universities, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, it's really a good idea to contact individual schools that you're interested in and find out how they handle accommodations and what their process for applying for accommodations looks like. Okay, are there any questions on the difference between the IDEA and the ADA before I move on in the presentation? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Oh, I have got a question here. When you say to negotiate, whoops, it just went away. When you say to negotiate, yes.
Yeah, I've got
Mary
it
Beth?
for you. Yeah, I've got it for you, Beth. So when you say to negotiate with colleges, reasonable accommodations, is that something that parents get involved since students are older than 18?
That's an excellent question. I will talk about that a little bit more later on, but just for right now, it's important to understand that yes, as soon as your child turns 18, the privacy laws kind of come into play. So you are no longer your child's advocate in the same way that you are in K through 12 education. However, when working with the colleges and universities to set up accommodations, um, parent involvement is pretty strong. I can tell you from my own experience in applying for accommodations at a Virginia state school, that I was involved in the process of figuring out what paperwork the school needed and in setting up the appointments and all of that. So there's another question here. Do colleges have evaluation processes? The answer is yes. So every college is going to differ in what they are going to require you to submit when you apply for accommodations. It used to be that you had to have a full psychoeducational evaluation that was no older than 3 years. That's changed, and a lot of schools now will accept the most recent IEP. They may have some requirements in terms of the IEP needing to be no older than, I don't know, 6 months or a year. It really depends on the school. So this is where it's important, once you've kind of narrowed down what your options are, that you do some additional research. And again, I will get to that a little bit later on, but yes, parents can be involved in the process of applying for accommodations, and you will have to submit some type of paperwork to the college or university. And just as a note, it's really best to start that process the summer before your child enters the program. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead then and move on. So the differences between high school and college mean that there are really two main things that you have to consider when you are figuring out what types of schools and programs you want to look at. So the first one here is whether or not your student is capable of college level work. And oftentimes that's a fairly straightforward question, but I would say that that's something, the pace of college work is often much faster than high school. So the best way to gauge college capability is to actually try out an AP course or something like that, and to do some speaking with teachers to determine whether or not your student is capable of college level work. But that's often a fairly straightforward answer. The other piece is what we call college readiness. Okay, so what is college readiness? Here's some examples of the skills for college readiness. So it's really everything beyond the academics. I like to think of college readiness as falling into four main categories. And those four main categories are self-advocacy, whether or not your student can ask for help when they need it, go to the appropriate offices within a college to get the help they need. I mean, that's one big difference is, in high school, your IEP may spell out very clearly how and when you receive additional supports, and the support services oftentimes will come to the student. In college, it's very different. You may apply for and receive accommodations, but when when your student gets to campus, it's really on them to go to the disability services office, to go to the tutoring center, to do the things that they're entitled to do. If they're entitled to note-taking assistance of kind, they have to initiate that process. No one is going to come to their class with a smart pen and say, here you go for use in your class. They've got to do that themselves. So that's self-advocacy. It's also executive function, which is a term that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but it's basically all of the skills associated with planning, initiating, and executing tasks. And executive function comes into play with both academic and those college readiness skills. Let's take laundry example. Does your student have the skills to realize that they only have enough underwear left for 2 days and that they need to do their laundry in order to have clean clothes? Social communication, when kids are younger, we talk about social skills. And this is sort of an extension of social skills. It's really, you've got so much free time on your hands when you're in a college atmosphere, that how you interact with your peers and seeking out those social connections really becomes an important skill. If your student isn't really capable and willing and able to seek out those social connections, college can be a very lonely time, especially if your student is living away from home. And then we've got the life skills, things like, does your student know how to do laundry? Will they put a red shirt in with all of their whites and turn all their clothes pink? Do they understand about budgeting? And if they're going to have an allowance at college, will they be able to effectively utilize that money? What's their self-care routine like? Their personal hygiene skills, do they recognize when they need to attend to those? So I should point out that these are skills that all students need to have before they go away to college and pursue post-secondary education. But for students with disabilities, oftentimes there are some additional challenges that those students face. Okay, so it's also important to note that post-secondary education can take many forms. The first few items on this list are probably ones that you're fairly familiar with: vocational programs, 2-year community college degrees. You're also probably familiar with the fact that most community colleges in our area, Northern Virginia Community College, has transfer agreements with a lot of the 4-year universities. So you can start out at Nova and then transfer pretty seamlessly, if you do all the right things, to let's say Virginia Tech or Mason or one of the state universities. Typically those transfer agreements are with the state universities. Traditional 4-year college, that's what you think of when you think of college, or let's Animal House, for example. 4-year traditional college where most students live at the school. Some of the options that you may be a little less familiar with are the last 3. So 4-year college with extra support. What is that? So that's basically a traditional college that has programs within it that either at no cost or for an additional fee will provide some of the extra disability services supports for your student. So to give you a local example, although this is by no means the only example, George Mason University has a program for autistic young adults called the Massey program. The Massey program provides a social skills component and additional academic supports as part of a paid, a fee-based program. And so what that means is your child applies to and gets into George Mason and then applies to the Massey program. And if they're accepted, you pay an additional fee. And what you get in return is a structured support program where the staff will do a little bit of chasing after your student. So if there's a planned social skills group and your student doesn't show up, they may get a phone call saying, you know, where were you? We expected you. So those are an option for some families. There are also specialized colleges. So for example, there is a school up in New England called Landmark College. And Landmark College, it's in Vermont, the entire academic program is designed to support students with learning differences. So those are options as well. And then finally, gap year. So when many people think about a gap year, they think about backpacking across Europe or you know, taking some time to find yourself before you go to college. But that's not really the only option. There are some gap year programs that are designed to provide the same kinds of wraparound supports that students who receive services in high school are used to getting, really more hands-on supports. And the idea behind these programs is that the staff of the program will work with the students to slowly pull back on the supports. So a good example of a program that's in our area is there's a national group called the College Living Experience. The College Living Experience, CLE, has a local branch in Montgomery County, Maryland, in Rockville. And so if you are part of this program, you can choose to live in an apartment complex with staff on site. You enroll in courses at Montgomery County Community College, and the staff of the College Living Experience provides, again, those wraparound supports. So it's sort of one step away from the parents, and the staff works with the students to make sure they're doing the things that they're supposed to do. And as they get better at those college readiness skills, the staff will walk back the services. And I see that Mary Beth has posted a link to the College Living Experience. I also have a question here. Is it recommended to allow the student to fend for themselves on some college readiness skills to truly allow them to fly the nest, or should there be parental involvement? That's an excellent question, Catherine. And the answer is that it's a really great idea to test out those college readiness skills, give your child the support they need to develop those skills, and then give them opportunities to test them out before they're out of your house. So while they still have the supported environment of home and high school and IEPs, it's really a great idea to test out those skills. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Here's another question about the College Living Experience. Yeah, a lot of these programs do have summer programs, shorter periods of time where you can take advantage. So there's another program called the College Internship Program, CIP. They have locations in several different places. And they have a summer residential program that you can do. So I would encourage you all to, do some Googling, find some things that might work well for your student. Are there any other questions before I move on to the next slide? How do we find out about programs with extra support? Oh, first of all, Shannon, Massey is M-A-S-I. I cannot remember what it stands for, to be honest with you. Mason Autism Support Initiative, I think is what it stands for. And the answer is about how do you get information? Depending on the disabilities, there are different places where you can find information about programs. So, my area of expertise is autism. So I can tell you that there is an organization called it's called CAN, College Autism Network. And the College Autism Network on their website actually has a really comprehensive list of all of the programs, the colleges that have extra support programs for students with autism. And that site actually will even tell you whether the program has a cost associated with it or not. So if you have an involvement in an organization specific to your child's main disability, that's a great place to start to find out about programs. There are also some specialists in disability supports at college, some college consultants that can help with that as well. So Edith wants to know, does the student have to have autism to participate? So if a student, it really depends on the program. Every program has their own list of requirements. Some schools, like Landmark College, and there's also Lynn University in Florida, has a lot of supports available to students. They have programs for a variety of disabilities. It's also important to remember that there's often some overlap. So a student whose primary diagnosis is autism may also have ADHD or some other learning issues. And yes, Mary Beth is correct that all colleges have disability services offices. And Alexandra wants to know, is there a lot of stigma around kids with disabilities? My child may be afraid to visit the tutoring center or disability services office, or may be afraid of teachers finding out that they need additional supports. So, this is in the area of college readiness skills. It's important to have some conversations about your students' level of comfort with their own diagnoses. And that is a barrier that some students have. They don't want to go to the disability services office. They don't want other people to know that they have disabilities. I will tell you that oftentimes at colleges, the way the process works is if your child is eligible for accommodations, the Disability Services Office will provide your child with a draft email that your child then sends to professors, letting them know that they are eligible for some accommodations. And that starts a conversation directly with the professor, a one-on-one conversation. Disability services offices and colleges in general are very sensitive to the needs of individual students. Look, it's in their best interest to have students succeed on their campus. Everybody who's familiar with the college rankings knows that whether students who enroll actually complete the 4 years or whatever the length is of the program, that counts toward where the college fits in the rankings. So schools are interested in helping students to succeed. Are professors supportive? Every professor is a little bit different. Most professors are now used to working with students who receive accommodations. And to be honest with you, most of the accommodations that are available in college really are, the professor doesn't have to do anything different. The professor just teaches, and the student will have the supports available to them. One area where you really do have to get the professor's permission is if your student has an accommodation that allows them to record lectures. So recording lectures now, now that everything's virtual, many professors are doing it. What I'm talking about is when a student goes into a class at college with a tape recorder. And that is something that the student has to have permission to do. Some professors really resist, and that's where the Disability Services Office can be incredibly helpful in terms of helping the student negotiate with a professor about recording lectures. So there are a lot of other questions that are coming up. Let me just take a second to see what we've got here, and then I think I'm gonna move on. Do professors receive training in how to support students? They should. A lot of the organizations that represent the disability services staff really promote teacher training at the college and university level. But that's going to differ from school to school. So that's a great question to ask when you call a disability services office, which you can actually do completely anonymously. You can call up George Mason and say, hey, my student is interested in possibly enrolling at your school. Can you tell me, disability services staff, what kind of training and support do you provide to professors to make sure that students can receive the accommodations that they need? So that's an excellent question. And again, it's going to vary from school to school. But it's actually, you know, there are so many students receiving accommodations now or requesting accommodations that colleges and universities are really opening up to those students and want them to be successful. I'm going to move on, but I will touch on these topics a little bit more shortly when I talk about how to get more information and start making decisions about what to do after high school. All right, so we've talked so far about the differences between high school and college. We've talked about college capability versus college readiness and some of the categories of college readiness. And we've talked about some of these post-secondary options. So now the question is, how do we actually put all of this stuff together to advance the college conversation? Okay, so the next part of this presentation is putting everything together. The very first thing that I suggest is that you have some important conversations with key players, key constituencies in your child's educational experience. So this slide is just giving you an example of some of those constituencies. You're going to want to talk with teachers and the members of the IEP team and the other people like school counselors and school psychologists, anyone who's involved directly in your college, in your students' high school educational experience, to talk about how they perceive your students' college capability and where their level of college readiness is right now. You're also going to want to have conversations within your family. You're going to want to talk with your child about, you know, what are your thoughts on what you're going to do after high school? Does your child perceive that they could handle college? And if not, what's causing the hesitation? You know, if you feel that your child isn't ready, where are the areas where you think your child needs to sort of step it up a notch to be ready for college? And the other key element here is any outside support team members. So if your child sees a therapist for mental health counseling or works with any other outside specialists, those are some key players too who know your child well. And it's important to have some conversations about where are the skills now, what are the challenges going to be, and that should help you to do two things. One is make a plan for where you want to make some changes so that you help your child develop those college readiness skills. And also, what are the supports that your child is going to have in order to be successful in college? If your child has a physical disability or, some kind of a hearing impairment or a vision impairment, what are the key components to an accommodations plan that your child will not be able to do without? And you've got to then make sure when you're looking at post-secondary options that you're looking at options where they can receive those accommodations. So again, assessing skills, having important conversations, those are really, really important. So what else? How do we take the information we have and actually move forward? Well, once you assess sort of where your student is through those conversations, then it's important to come up with a plan for developing and increasing their college readiness skills. So this slide and the next slide talk about some ways that you may do that, some things that are pretty important to increase college readiness. The first one might seem like a no-brainer, but sometimes students get to college or get to the point in the process where they're negotiating with disability services offices, and they don't really have a good understanding of their diagnosis. And this, we can look back at the question that was asked about students feeling okay about taking advantage of the support services and accommodations that are available to them post-high school. And part of that may be them really understanding what is my diagnosis and how does it impact me. Sort of that self-awareness piece can be really important. Students, it's also a really good idea if your student is in high school and isn't already involved in the IEP process to get them involved. Or if they are involved, to take a look at their current level of involvement and see if it would be a good idea to increase that. So is your student participating in the development of goals for the IEP? Are they providing feedback on how things are going in the classes, or things that they aren't getting that they think they would benefit from? That's the kind of participation that your students should be having in their IEP process. They need to know that they have a voice and that they're being heard. And then also decreasing parental involvement in academics. So what I mean by that is, you may have a situation where your child comes home from school or gets off the Zoom and they have a complaint about something that happened in the classroom, or a test that didn't go well. Your default might be to fire off an email to the teacher. Well, this is the time, high school is the time where you might want to say, let's craft an email for you to send to your teacher, or prompt your student to take the initiative to contact their teachers on their own, because when they get to college, that's what's going to happen. You're not, because of privacy laws, you're not going to have access to their professors or other people on campus without your students' express permission. So it's important that they know and they feel comfortable contacting professors on their own. And it might be a question of them really being scared to stick up for themselves, or not understanding the nuances of how you craft an email when you have a complaint, and you want the professor, the teacher, to take you seriously. So students can really use help with that, and those things really help with the development of self-advocacy skills. Executive function. This is where someone asked earlier, is it a good idea to let your child take the reins? And the answer is yes. There are lots of different ways to do that, but it's really, I think, an important thing to test out before they get to college. So in terms of academics, a great way to do that might be to take an AP class, or to take a self-directed course. In Fairfax County, we've got the Economics and Personal Finance course, which students now have a lot of options of how they take that. And that might be a good thing to try out. Take it instead of taking it in school where you go to the class every day or every other day, take it as a self-directed course. See if your student, with some guidance, can manage the workload and can pace the workload. Again, the parental role becomes important here. Are you the kind of parent who asks your child every day when they get home from school, okay, what's on your schedule for this afternoon? What assignments do you have? What are your due dates? Maybe shift that a little bit, start shifting that, so that you have, some families find that a weekly meeting with your child, where they tell you, here's what's coming up. Here's what I have on my schedule. And then you can probe with, well, how are you going to manage that activity? The idea, again, is shifting the responsibility to your student, with the notion that when they get to college, it's really going to be more on them. That's not to say that you drop your child off at the dorm room and you never talk to them again until they come home for Thanksgiving. But this is a good time to establish a dynamic that you can take with you to college, that your student can take with you. So those weekly meetings with parents, that's a great thing to continue in college if your child is on board with that, where maybe every Sunday you talk with your student, you say, all right, tell me what you have going on this week. How are you going to handle your workload? So those are some ways to develop executive function skills. Social communication and life skills. Let me talk about life skills first, because that's, I think, way more straightforward. Have your child start doing their own laundry if they're not doing it now. Make it their responsibility to make sure they have clean socks for school, or if they are supposed to wear their chorus t-shirt on Wednesday, that the shirt is clean. That's going to be an important skill in college. Well, it should be an important skill. Now, there are probably some students who are wearing the same clothes to school every day, but you want to make sure that you're sending them off with the laundry skill. Cooking and nutrition. Again, right now you have a lot of control over what your child eats, about providing balanced meals. But when they get to college, especially if they're living away from home, that becomes something that they're completely responsible for. So you might want to start shifting and making sure they understand what a balanced meal looks like before they get to college. Same thing with money management. You may have a dynamic in your household right now where every time your child gets ready to go do something, they come to you and you hand them a $20 bill. But in college, it's going to be a little bit different, and they're going to have some better idea of what things cost, and how to manage their money. The last thing on this list, driving. So if you decide that what's best for your student, or if your student feels more comfortable with living at home and going to school. So let's say you decide you're going to do NOVA as the first step beyond high school. You need to think about how your student's going to get to class. We are not blessed with a robust public transportation system here in Virginia. So driving and having that level of independence may be really important. If your child isn't able to drive because of their disability, what are your options? How will your child get to class? And if they are going to go away to school, what is the transportation like in the town where the college is located? If your student's dream is to go to college and live off campus, is that feasible given the options that you're considering? So those are life skills. In terms of social communication, again, that social piece is so important for mental health and to provide a support network at college. A lot of our kids don't necessarily understand how to cultivate a friend group, how to make, who's a good friend? How do you define a good friend? Those are conversations that you should be having now. What are their hobbies? A lot of colleges and universities, and this is something that's actually pretty easy to find out about a school. A lot of schools have a million different clubs, right? So if your child is really into anime or a particular kind of video game or likes to hike, look at what's offered at the different schools that you're considering. And to help your child develop a plan for how they're going to get their foot in the door socially at college. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of decreasing the parental role as you help your child develop these college readiness skills. Some students have highly structured social lives in high school, either because they have heavy academic loads and they don't have a lot of time, or because a lot of their social activity is around school-based activities. So for example, marching band, that's a whole culture in and of itself. So parents can play a bigger role than they actually realize in their child's social life in high school. So in high school, you might want to, if your child comes to you and says, I'm on a weekend or a holiday, I'm bored, let them take the first step at trying to get some activities organized for themselves. Mary Beth has posted that colleges often have student organization nights. Yes, usually during freshman orientation and the first few weeks of school, they'll have activity fairs where your student can learn about different activities on campus. Schools also have those activity fairs oftentimes during accepted student events for students who have been accepted to the school but haven't made a decision about where to go, or as part of information days for prospective students. Any questions about ways in which you can help your child develop college readiness skills before I move on? And I'm loving the chat here about texting and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very cool. I did not realize, I have to tell you, that it's very uncool and rude to actually call someone else, that you should definitely text. Okay. Okay, so yes, Edith is asking about visiting schools ahead of time. So that's a great entree into my next slide here, which is how do you discover and narrow down some of your options? So great places to start with your college exploration The high school career counselors have some great information. And then I know when my kids were in Fairfax County Public Schools, they used Naviance which is a tool through the Fairfax County through Blackboard. We accessed it through Blackboard. That where you can explore some colleges and universities. And the nice thing about Naviance is that the system already knows what your GPA is, and then also once you take standardized tests, and can tell you what schools, based on your academic profile, what schools might be good options for you. So that's a good place to start. If you are involved in an organization that supports your student's main disability, the parents in that organization can be a really great source of information about college options, post-secondary options that might be good for you to take a look at. The College Board actually has a great website, and through that website you can explore, in the same way you can do with Naviance, some attributes of colleges and universities. We've got a couple questions here. Do four-year universities not accept students with a standard diploma? And also there's another question about keywords or phrases to use when you're looking at schools and with disability services. So in terms of the diploma situation, you know, I'm not familiar with the specifics of different colleges and universities, but one thing I will say is that some schools do have a language requirement. And this is where some students who have disabilities get a little hung up, is that if a school has a language requirement, they expect you to have had several years of foreign language, or they expect you to have language proficiency to a certain level in a foreign language for graduation from the college. If your child has accommodations in high school where they are not taking a foreign language, you're going to want to really look at that and ask about that. Some schools have very easy ways to waive a language requirement in college. So for example, in some majors, you may have an option between a BA, which has a language requirement, and a BS, which means your child has taken an additional math or science or one of each course in order to get their diploma. So yeah, Edith, I'm talking about, you know, most colleges will have listed as a requirement for admission that they would like to see that your child has taken several years of a foreign language. So if your student does not take a foreign language because of their IEP accommodations, you're going to want to check with the schools about that. And Kristen is saying that she's aware of a student at Mary Washington with a standard diploma. Yeah, I think if the issue is not the standard diploma and the advanced diploma, it's the other option. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the correct term, but I know there is a diploma option that has differentiated requirements. Yes, the applied studies diploma. These are questions that you need to talk with the specific colleges and universities that you're looking at. Alexandra is asking, your child wants to be a student athlete playing a sport. Do you consider this too much of a commitment? Okay, so athletics is a separate, completely separate entity. When you are a student athlete, if you're hoping to be accepted into college on an athletic scholarship, I know that there are different requirements, different things that the schools look at. So if that's what you're talking about, then you need to talk with the specific schools. You should make sure that your child is academically capable of handling college work. If they want to also participate in athletics, now remember, there's different ways to do that at the college level. You can be on one of the college's teams. There are intramural sports options, which are more sort of social and less competitive, and that's less of a commitment. And then there are also club sports, which is sort of in between. In club sports, my kids are not athletes, so I'm talking really about my general understanding of how this works. With club sports, they may play against other schools, but it's not the same kind of competitive process to getting onto the team. I would suggest, Alexandra, and anyone else who's got a student who wants to play sports at some level in college, that's part of the conversation that you should have. For some students, sports are an important part of their mental and physical well-being. Some students actually do better in terms of executive functioning when they have other things in their schedule that have set times. And for some students, it may be overwhelming to participate in a sport and get their work done. This is a conversation that you should have, and see if you can figure out a way to test it out before your students get to school. Derek is asking, how hard is it to get a scholarship for students with disabilities for Massey or some of the other programs? Derek, I do not know. Those are questions that you need to ask the programs themselves. Someone else asked me when I was doing this webinar for another organization about using 529 funds for these extra programs, and I don't have the specific answer to that question either. So I would encourage you to contact the folks at the different programs that you're interested in to get that information. And yes, Mary Beth is right. Your college and career specialists will also probably have that kind of information. Edith is wanting to know about videos online that tour college campuses. Actually, this is sort of the advantage of COVID, is that a lot of colleges and universities have spent the last 6 months beefing up their online presence in terms of what they have available. Some of them have drone footage of tours of the campus. They'll show you inside dorm rooms, all that kind of stuff. Most of the college visits right now are virtual. So yes, Tara's correct. If you go to the school that you're interested in and you look on their website, you will find lots of virtual information. So just to continue going down this list, another benefit of COVID for a lot of our students with disabilities is that a lot of the college fairs are virtual now. So if you have a student who gets overwhelmed by large crowds, or the noise in a large gymnasium with lots of different things set up, you might be in really good shape to participate in a college fair this year. We've already talked about college websites and the information that they can provide. And then again, if you have the means and you're interested, you can hire a college consultant. And there are consultants that specialize in working with students with disabilities. I actually know of a consultant. I don't endorse any consultants, but I am aware of a consultant who actually specializes in working with students who have physical disabilities and physical health challenges that may need some special care. for in college. And what do college consultants offer? Some college consultants actually just spend a tremendous amount of their time exploring what disability services look like at different colleges and universities. They visit some of these colleges. They may have specialized knowledge that you can take advantage of. But the truth of the matter is that you can really get a lot of this information on your own if you do the right kind of sleuthing. So let me move to the next slide here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how you learn more about what a college has to offer. I encourage you to visit college websites. Something that I recommend that people do is how easy, as just a new person looking at the website, how easy is it to find links to the Disability Services Office? All colleges, or most colleges, have their mission statement on their website in a pretty prominent place. What does their mission statement say about individuals with learning differences or accommodating diverse learners on their campus? You can learn a lot about a school by how their website is set up, what they're featuring prominently. I also encourage you to cold call some disability services offices at schools that you're interested in. Lots of folks are concerned about the disclosure issue. You know, you may be worried that your child is going to be at a disadvantage for admission to a particular college or university if you disclose a disability. What I am hearing from college and university folks is that it's not, there's no reason for you to disclose a disability in the admissions process, okay? One thing that I will hear from them is that you don't even need to write your essay about your disability unless there is something about your academic profile that you think your disability helps to explain. Like, for example, if you discovered ADHD or a processing disorder, that's a great example. Let's say your child has a processing disorder that impacts how long it takes them to really get information into long-term memory so that they can do well on tests. You may not have realized that until your student gets to the point where they're taking a faster paced course, like an AP course. So if your child has a grade on their transcript that's maybe out of sync with everything else, and their disability can help explain that grade, then you might want to consider writing about that on your essay, or how your disability has taught you to persevere in different situations. You know, so there are times when it can be appropriate, but you don't have to feel like you need to disclose a disability or hide a disability in the application process. But what you can do is you can call a disability services office and say, without giving your name or any other information, this is my child's disability. How familiar are you with that disability? What types of accommodations should my child expect to be able to take advantage of on your campus? What kind of training do you provide to your professors? Anything you can think of. I would avoid calling colleges at times of like midterms or finals, but most schools will be very willing to answer your questions. Again, they want students to apply who know what they're getting themselves into, and they also want to increase the chances that students who are coming to their school can succeed. There are some questions here about standardized tests and COVID. I really am, let me address standardized tests first. Okay, so yes, many schools are waiving standardized tests or have admissions processes that are test optional. Here's the thing that you may not know. Some schools that have scholarships for academic excellence, who will reward students for their good grades in high school rather, with money, scholarship money in college. For some of those scholarship programs, they actually require standardized tests. So if you think that your child might qualify for an academic scholarship based on their academic performance in high school, you should ask if your child needs to have standardized test scores submitted for those programs. So in other words, there may be a school that has a test optional admissions process, but if you're interested in any kind of scholarship money, you may need to provide those test scores. I really, there are some folks here about asking about COVID, specifically COVID, and how that impacts what colleges are willing to do to get students. And yes, Mary Beth is correct. Those are questions that you should really address with specific colleges and universities. And in addition, the same way that you shouldn't be afraid to call a disability services office, you also shouldn't be afraid to call a financial aid office and ask questions about that. Other ways to learn more, we've talked about looking at college websites. When COVID lifts, and we can do it again, I encourage people to visit colleges and see what that's like. Attend some information sessions. Again, most of those are online right now. Google college towns. If you want to get a better sense, or your child is looking for something specific from their college experience, you might want to find out what the town has to offer. And when you do that, you should look at transportation options. And then also, again, don't underestimate talking to friends and relatives who have more experience with particular schools or with your particular disability that your child has. And Edith is right. You've got to gauge when your child is ready to have these college conversations. So the point here is really to get you in the right frame of mind to think about and sort of start evaluating when would be a good time to have those college conversations. Okay. Oftentimes people will ask me about timelines. When should I start doing all these things? So here's a suggested timeline for when it's a good idea to start doing these different things that I've been talking about. I will caution you not to start too early. When if your child is in 9th grade or is currently in 8th grade and getting ready to move over to high school, there's a lot of transition happening there, and they may not really be in a good frame of mind to start talking about college and increasing college readiness skills. However, for students who are ready, 9th, 10th grade is a great time to increase student involvement in the IEP process, and to start, as a parent, really identifying some ways where you can start walking back your own involvement and shift some responsibility to your students. 10th, 11th grade, that's a good time to start talking about testing accommodations for the standardized tests. And also for trying to figure out what are your accommodation priorities in college. Again, going back to what supports does your child have in place now as part of their IEP that maybe you can test walking back, and you might find some great strategies for your child to take more responsibility and have fewer accommodations, and what accommodations are really going to be crucial for your child in college. 11th, 12th grade is really where it's important to start taking those college readiness skills for a test drive through a summer program, through an advanced course or a self-directed course, something like that. And also when you should really be narrowing down what your college options are, what kinds of things you want to take a look at, and starting to explore college accommodations. Edith is asking, I understand many kids with ADHD, et cetera, are emotionally behind by several years. Too much pressure can be counterproductive. Maybe the gap year would help. Yeah, I mean, again, this is all part of the conversation. Where is your child emotionally ready for college? I mean, I can, I'm not in your shoes, but it's important to make sure that you're sending your child off to college, especially if they're going to be living away from home, with that level of readiness. Gap years can be a really great idea at this point. And again, with gap years, you really need to think about how do you want to use that time. If you do this exploration process and you realize that there's really a lot of work that you have to do, and it would be a good idea to take a gap year, plan that gap year really well so that you're working on those college readiness skills. And maybe as part of that gap year, your student takes a course at the community college so that they can kind of learn to work and balance the academic and the non-academic aspects. SAT prep classes for students with learning challenges. I'm not 100% well-versed on all of those, but again, I would suggest that you take a look at talking with your college and career counselor about SAT prep and other things as well. Okay, we not want to pay for two unless gap year might be a good choice. Yeah, I mean, CB is saying that would not want to pay for a full year of college tuition unless your student's ready for the experience, and that's absolutely true. I mean, if you want to look at purely from a financial standpoint and also from an emotional stability standpoint, if your student isn't ready for college and you send your student off to college, is that student going to wind up coming home in October, having had a negative experience, and you're going to lose that tuition money? So there's a lot to really and balance here. IQ as an indicator of college ability. Jenna, that's a tough one. And Catherine is right. Emotional level is really equally as important. And every college has their own way of looking at college ability. And if that's a concern, I would ask about that. Okay, we're actually starting to be low on time. These are some great questions. So I'm just gonna move on here and get to my suggested resources. I'm gonna start with the one in the middle here, from high school to college, which is a really fantastic workbook / information guide for families who have a student with a disability. Elizabeth Hamblett, this is her wheelhouse. The book has some great resources, including things like worksheets for how to evaluate different colleges and universities, and how to talk to your student about what their strengths and challenges are. So I highly recommend that. On the left, we've got this book, Taking Flight by Perry LaRocque. Perry LaRocque is the founder of a program for students with college students with disabilities, a college program for students with disabilities called Mansfield Hall. And he's written this book. He's talking directly to students with disabilities and about things that they need to think about when they're thinking about college and their life beyond high school. So that's a great resource. And parents can read it too. The Organized Student, if your son or daughter has a lot of executive function challenges, and organization is one of those challenges. This book has some great ideas for things that you might want to try to help your student get organized. All of these things, college readiness, it's not one size fits all. So you've got to try some different things and find what works for your student. All right, so those are some books that I suggest. The next slide is a list of web resources. And I apologize that there are no nice graphics on here. I really could not find any. The first one is a VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University resource. Includes a series of videos and exercises that can help you and your student identify strengths and areas that you might want to look at improving, and also help you explore some college options. The second resource is from the American Psychological Association's website, and this is actually more geared toward parents, about articles and some other resources geared toward things to think about when you're looking at the transition from high school to post-secondary education. The third link here is to the Mid-Atlantic ADA website. They have some very useful graphics that will help you look at the differences between the laws governing special education K through 12 and what your student with a disability can expect from the ADA. It's a lot of great information there. And then this last resource, the Council of Learning Disabilities. This particular link is to an article on college options that I think is just really well done. And their website also has some other useful transition-related information that might be helpful. So I'm also going to put in the chat here on my website, and actually the very last slide is my contact information, which I'll put up. And I'm also going to put in the chat, on my website, you can actually sign up to receive, here's the link, a guide that I created that's totally free on how to have some of these conversations with your students. How to start them, some questions you might want to ask to get the conversations going. This is my contact information up here if you have any questions or you want to get in touch about some of the things that I do working with students. But that's it. That's what I've got. And I am looking forward to answering some more questions. So fire away. I know that we're going to be sending out the slides, and this is also being recorded, and Mary Beth has told me that it's going to be posted on the website. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera on so you can see what I look like, and I can actually speak with you directly. Here I am. Hello. Sharing my video. All right. So questions. All right. Assistance with job search and summer internships. Edith, that's a great question. I would suggest that well, a couple of things. First of all, when you're looking for summer jobs with your students with disabilities, you really have to think about good fit. We tend to, as parents, think about first jobs as working in a fast food restaurant or working at a grocery store or something like that. Those may not be the best fit for your student's disability profile. So talking to your IEP and your other supports staff, it might be a really good way to start investigating summer jobs. Do I recommend a lighter course load first semester or quarter? That can be helpful. Typical course load is 15 credits, which usually translates to 5 courses. Having your student take 4 instead of 5 classes can be really helpful. It also might help if there are some academic requirements that your student needs to fulfill where they already maybe have a little bit of a heads up. So for example, if they took a if they took calculus, Fairfax County has an applied calculus course, which is wonderful. It's sort of calculus for non-math people, so using economics and other things to talk about calculus. If they need to take a calculus course as part of their college general education requirements, and they already have some experience, working one of those kinds of courses in the first year can also be helpful. That's where Disability Services Office and summer advising can be very helpful at a specific school. Shannon wants to know, you talked earlier about how schools often have orientation sessions. Is something like that available for students who decide to go to community college? Yes, absolutely. Talk with your college and career counselor. NOVA often does site visits. Well, I don't know how they're doing it now. I'm sure they're doing it remotely. But they often do site visits with the local high schools. And also, a lot of colleges come to the high schools to do information sessions for students. I'm going to assume those are all being done virtually. They're usually in the spring and the fall. So you can check that out as well. Any other questions? Is there a list of companies that are open to people with hidden disabilities for internships? So there's an interesting resource called Hire Autism. Hire as in like hiring someone for a job. So HIRE, Hire Autism, which is a program from the Organization of Autism Research. Thank you, Mary Beth. They may be a great source of information. They are a great source of information on companies that are open to high individuals with disabilities. I don't know if they will have information on summer internships, but you can certainly check with them. Jenna wants to know about summer bridge programs. Okay, so there are some schools that offer special summer bridge programs for students with disabilities. There are some specialized summer programs like the programs that are offered through the college internship program and other specialized programs that can help your student test drive whether or not they're ready for college over the summer. And then once your child is accepted into a college and you've actually accepted admission, there are oftentimes additional summer prep experiences that those schools will offer. Again, that's going to be very specific to the colleges and universities. Anything else? Oh, you're very welcome for the presentation. And yes, Mary Beth, thank you so much for putting up all these links and other information in the chat. That's really helpful. Does anybody have any other questions that I could answer right now? All right. Financial aid. Okay, so financial aid is a whole nother discussion. And I am not an expert on financial aid, although I will tell you, Edith, that as I said, the same way you can call disability services offices, you can also call financial aid offices and find out how they work. Websites for students with disabilities. I'm not sure what on financial aid. I don't know. What colleges were on the short list for my kids? You know, I will tell you, full disclosure, I have 2 students at James Madison University right now. And then I have another of my kids who graduated from a private college. And really, you've got to look at what's right for your family and what that college has to offer for your child's specific constellation of issues and concerns. So, um, I would suggest, CD, that you really look at the college websites and talk to people within your disability community to see if there are any schools that are favorites among that group. Guidance for dorm living and having roommates. Okay, that's another big thing. So this is where having a test drive can be really helpful. Having your students spend some time away from home can be helpful. Yes, some schools will provide an accommodation of having a student have their own room. However, you have to weigh the benefits of having their own room with the costs of having their own room. So when your student has a roommate, they have a potential for a built-in social partner, at least to get school going. So, again, that's the kind of thing, if they have a health issue that where they have certain requirements like needing air conditioning or being on the first floor or having a specific kind of bed, it might very well be better for them to have their own room. That's, again, something they need to speak with the College Disability Services office at the school where your child's going to attend. I will tell you, CB, that, JMU, we had a great experience with their Disability Services office. And, and Mary Beth is on the parent council, so she can help answer questions. And Edith, yes, some schools have roommate matching programs. I always like to call it, and actually both of my JMU students used that program for matching. I like to call it match.com for roommates. So you fill out a questionnaire about your habits and your likes and dislikes, and then the school will match you with a roommate. Something also to think about with colleges and universities is that many of them have what they call living and learning communities, which are specialized halls on dorms where students with similar majors or different interests like social justice, things like that, where students can, with like interests, can live together. And if you have a student who has some difficulties with making social connections, those might be good to think about as well. And again, that's going to vary from college and to college, and so these are things that you should look at specifically with the school that your child plans to attend. What's what called, Edith? I'm not sure. Some schools have single person dorms. Yes, and actually, Tara brings up a really good point, is that some schools, I know, for example, Goucher, if you have a support animal, even if it's for emotional support, you can actually get an accommodation to bring a pet to school if that's something that your child has. Edith, Mary Beth put it in the chat, residential learning communities, or sometimes they're called living and learning communities. I know a lot of colleges and universities have that. Locally, JMU, Mary Washington for sure. Those are two schools that I know of that absolutely have those. Oh, there you go. Stormy's telling us that Marietta College in Ohio also has a support pet program. So we are pretty much out of time. This has really been a great discussion.
No, Beth, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Yeah, absolutely. If any parents, certainly they have your contact information for follow-up.
Yes.
The Parent Resource Center, we're available for follow-up. I actually, of the of the staff at the PRC, I have a lot of college knowledge, so I'm happy to help and redirect, and we do have resources in our library around just supporting picking colleges and so forth with Students with Disabilities. I'm going to double check to see if we have the resources that you named, Beth, because those would be very worthwhile for us to have in our library. So definitely
Great.
we'll work on getting those. Also would like to remind everyone, we've put the evaluation for this webinar in the chat box. Would really appreciate your feedback today. Beth is always looking for feedback, and so is the PRC.
Yes.
And if you could just take a moment to do that for us, that would be great. We're trying to build and make sure that you all have the things that you need. And so any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. So Beth, thank you again for today. This has been
You're very welcome. Thank you. And also, I have a resource section on my website. So a lot of the things that I mentioned, I have links on my resource page on my website. So folks can check that out too.
All right. Well, thank you.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, we
All
wish
right.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And we wish everyone a very happy weekend, and we might be getting some snow. So it might be kind of nice to see a little bit of snow. But anyway,
Absolutely.
please, everyone, take care, and thanks so much for joining us